My name is Christina Ivette. I'm a passive income strategist and a trust strategist. So I teach people how to build wealth with a trust and how to actually protect their assets. That's the number one thing, right? A lot of us, we have, homes, we have cars, we have money in the bank, and we never think to ourselves, if I don't wake up tomorrow, how is this house that's in my name, how is it going to be transferred to my child's name? Right? We don't think about that. And that's something that we do because if we don't have our affairs in order, then our assets is going to end up in probate, and you don't want that to happen. So let me share my screen here and we're going to dive right in. And like I said, if you guys have any questions, you just let me know, okay? So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that I want to let you know is what a trust is, right? Because a lot of us, we have heard the term trust, but we're not sure, what it is. So a trust is an entity, okay? So it's a living, breathing entity, just like you, just like me. And so anything that you can do, a trust can do. So if you could build credit, a trust can build credit. If you could buy a house, a trust could buy a house. If you, can write a book, a trust could write a book, okay? So it's an entity. A trust, does pay taxes just like you paid taxes, right? And so there's several different parts to a trust, right? So there's two main parts. The first part is the declaration where you're declaring what it is and what it is not. And then the second part is the actual agreement, because a trust is a contract, you guys. So you see that contract here on the screen. That's exactly what it is. It's a contract. And I will show you an example of what it looks like if we have time. And so it's a contract between several different parties. I'm going to go through those parties, okay? So the different parties involved in the trust are grantor, trustee, and beneficiary. So the grantor is the person who actually creates the trust, okay? Another name for grantor is settler. You might hear that. Or trustor. You might hear those terms as well. Because when you're dibbling and dabbling into trust, there's a lot of terms that are very unique when you're using that type of entity, okay? So the grantor is the creator. So on paper, they have actually created the trust, and they've created it for the trustee. They have created it for the beneficiary, but they've appointed the trustee to actually control the assets, okay? So they created it for somebody else, so not for themselves, okay? The next party involved is the trustee. So the actual contract is between those two parties, between the grantor and the trustee. So when you are setting up a trust, it does need to be notarized. That's what makes it legal, and it's notarized by those two individuals. So the trustee is the person who actually controls all the assets in the trust, okay? So they are the individual who is going to be operating the trust on a day-to-day basis and pretty much maintaining the assets that are in the trust, okay? One term that we use for trustee is fiduciary, okay? So that means that they are the fiduciary for the beneficiary. So everything that they're doing, they're growing the wealth in the trust estate, they're preserving the wealth. They're doing it for the beneficiaries. So they have all the power and the control, and the beneficiaries have no power and control. So the beneficiaries are the inheritors of the trust. So they are the individuals that when the trust gets dissolved in the future, then the beneficiaries are going to receive all of the assets inside of the trust, okay? So their main mission is to understand the trust and understand the powers that the trustee has when they're operating the trust, okay? So once we understand that, we need to know that there's several different types of trust, right? You have irrevocable, you have land trust, living trust, revocable, charitable. So we're going to talk about a little bit of those. So every single type of trust is either falls within these two categories, right? So it's either revocable or irrevocable. So a revocable trust is where the grantor has the ability to revoke things, right? So that means that the grantor can take back property, can dissolve the trust, can make amendments to the trust, and can remove trustees and beneficiaries, okay? Because the trust is revocable, It is because it's revocable, that means that it can be changed by the person who created it. And if that trust was to end up in litigation, then they would pierce through the trust, right? Because it can be changed. So it's not seen as a solid trust because it can be pierced, okay? So the other type of trust is irrevocable. Irrevocable means that the grantor, the person who created it, they cannot take back property. So they can't revoke assets. They cannot make amendments to the trust. They cannot remove trustees or beneficiaries. And so they have that what we call that irrevocability, right? And with that type of trust, because that trust is cannot be changed by the person who created it, if it were to end up in litigation, that's what we call a bulletproof trust. And we call it a bulletproof trust because if it's because most likely the judges will decide not to pierce through the trust, right? Because it can't be changed. So if you were to choose out of these two categories, right? So every single trust falls within these two, you would want to choose an irrevocable trust, but you don't want to appoint yourself as the grantor because then you're going to be locking yourself out of the trust because the grantor of an irrevocable trust, they are pretty much have no power, control, influence, or they don't benefit from the trust. Okay. So you don't want that position. You want to be the trustee, which is the person who has all the power and the control and are able to actually, grow the assets in the trust. Okay. So now let's talk about how to actually create the trust, right? So we know that we want, we know that there's several different types of trust, right? So the first thing that you want to do is you want to determine what type of trust you want to create, okay? So determine if you want to create a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. Once you've decided which trust that you want to create, then you want to determine the trust name and you want to appoint the different parties, okay? So like I said, I recommend an irrevocable trust because that is actually going to protect you from creditors, okay? And so now when you are determining a trust name, please do not name the trust after yourself because the trust is supposed to provide privacy. So nobody is supposed to know that those assets belong to you, right? So you transfer them into the name of the trust so that you can protect those assets and you don't want your name to be associated with the trust. So that's why it's important for you not to name the trust after yourself, okay? So when you are actually setting up these types of trusts, for example, if you're setting up a business trust, then you're going to use terms like co, company, corp, holdings, things like that. If you're setting up a family trust, then you're going to use terms like dynasty, legacy, generation, family, things like that, okay? So now you're going to appoint the grantor, the trustee, the beneficiaries, and successors, right? So the grantor is the person who created it. So if you are setting up an irrevocable trust, you don't want to be the grantor. So you're going to appoint someone else. That person could be anybody. It could be a sibling, it could be a parent, it could be a neighbor, it could be a coworker, a cousin, a best friend, anyone. As long as that person is 18 years or older and able to notarize the trust with you, then you are going to choose that person as your grantor, okay? And they're going to be your grantor on paper. Even though you are the one establishing the trust, on paper, you're appointing them to be the creator because you want to appoint yourself to be the trustee. The trustee has all the power and the control and the influence. And so you're going to appoint yourself as the trustee. And then the beneficiaries can be either entities, right? So a beneficiary could be another trust or an LLC, okay? And or a natural person. So typically with the beneficiaries, we actually choose our children to be beneficiaries. So that's a good option. And so with these beneficiaries, you can have an unlimited amount of grantors, trustees, or beneficiaries. And then the last position that we're going to put in place is the successor. A successor is the successor trustee. So you have to understand that the trust is going to outlive you, especially if you decide to operate the trust for more than 100 years, because we are intentional about building generational wealth. That means that we want our wealth to last many, many, many generations. And so if that's the case, you need to already appoint someone who's going to take over after you if you become incapacitated, if you expire, or if you decide to resign. Who is going to take over after you? Well, that person is going to be the successor. So what's going to happen is once you appoint that person, they are just going to be in a dormant situation waiting for you to resign or step down. And then at that point, once that happens, then they pick up where you left off, okay? Number three, you're going to actually create the agreement, okay? So like I said, there's two parts. The first part is the actual declaration where you're declaring that it's a private contract. And then you're also declaring what it is not. So you need to be very specific in the verbiage that we use in the trust. So we are declaring, hey, this is not a corporation. This is not an LLC or a partnership or any other type of entity. This is a private contract, which is a trust. Okay. So that's what the declaration is. And then we have the indenture. The indenture is the actual agreement where you have all the provisions. Those provisions are rules and regulations on how you want the trust to be ran, 50 to 100 years into the future. Okay. So once you've created that contract, it needs to be signed. It's going to be signed by the grantor and the first trustee, which is you, okay? And then it needs to be notarized. The notarization is what makes it legal. Once it's legal, you can start operating it right away. So if you get it notarized right now, then you can literally go down to the bank and start opening up a bank account and fund your trust. So that's what would be next, right? So if it's notarized, then what you're going to do is you are going to actually go down to the bank and open up your bank account. So you're going to open up a trust checking account or any other type of management account, and that's going to be considered your trust fund. And then you need to fund the trust, okay? So you can fund it with whatever you want. I've seen banks to where you can fund it with $100, with $5, with 1,000. So it just depends, but it's up to you to decide how much you want to fund your trust fund with, okay? So there's two things that you need to provide to the bank. One is your certificate of trust. That is the proof of identity of the trust, because you have to understand it's an entity. They can't just go down to the county to make sure that this entity exists. So they have to rely on the information that you're providing so that they know, hey, this is a legal entity that we can actually move forward with. So the second thing that you need is an EIN number with the IRS. So once you provide those two things, and the bank is going to open up a checking account for you. And then at that point, you go and fund it. Once you fund it, then you are going to begin to operate the trust, which is maintaining that trust fund and all the assets that you put into it. So what are some assets that you can put into the trust? You can put a car, you can put a house, you can put jewelry, furniture, you can put an insurance policy, you can put cash, crypto, stocks, bonds, a lot of things. Pretty much anything that you can own as a person, the trust can also earn. And so you can either gift it, you can give it by way of a will or deed or anything like that. Okay, so let's just say that you have a primary residence, right? Well, this primary residence is in your personal name. And so what you want to do is you want to execute a quit claim deed, and you want to deed over that property from your personal name into the trust. And so then you are going to notarize that deed. You're going to submit it to the county. they are going to record it and update the public records to show that Jubril is no longer the owner of that house, and now his trust is the owner of the house, okay? So that is what's going to happen when you transfer an asset. Once that asset belongs to the trust, it is the financial responsibility of the trust to be able to fulfill any of those obligations. So that can include paying utilities, mortgage, taxes, insurance, and everything. All of those things need to come from the trust fund account now because the trust owns that house or that asset, okay?